Hello, welcome to my podcast, PowerPoint for the Courtroom, Doing It the Right Way, a video podcast being hosted on Spotify for podcasters. Thank you for visiting. This is my trailer for episode 13. And in episode 13, we work with jury instructions. These are PowerPoints that are designed for closing arguments, obviously not for the evidence portion of your case. Specifically, we're going to work with creating element charts, taking a jury instruction and breaking it down element by element, proposition by proposition, and giving the jurors limited text to look at while you're making your argument and weaving your evidence, your digital media, into the argument at the same time, so that while you are speaking, the relevant portion of the law is on the screen, as is the relevant digital media that supports what you're saying. Remember, this concept of the visual trial is to always back up with what you're saying with some visual evidence or some other visuals, because if what you're saying is backed up by evidence, then obviously what comes out of your mouth must be true, and that is very important when you're giving your closing argument. Marrying your words with the law and the evidence all in one place for the jurors to see and hear. So in this trailer, I'm going to show you what we're going to cover in the actual tutorial in episode 13. This here is the jury instruction in Illinois for the offense of first-degree murder. Now, this is a typical looking jury instruction, at least in Illinois it is, and you can tell there's a lot of text on that slide. It's a lot more text than you want your jurors to have to digest at any one time. Now, I would show this instruction as I'm about to tell the jury that the judge is going to instruct them on what the prosecution needs to prove for the offense of first-degree murder. But I don't use this full instruction for my actual argument. There's just too much text on the slide. The jurors don't know what to focus on, and they may be reading something completely unrelated to what I'm saying, which means they're not listening to me. So that's why you want to kind of force the jurors to look at only portions of this instruction when you get to that point in your argument. Maybe it's a proposition, maybe it's a phrase, maybe it's one word that later will be defined with another instruction. A very simple way to do that, with this whole instruction on the slide, to me not the best way, but a way to do that is to use font colors. Just by changing the font color from white to yellow in this particular case, I'm forcing the jurors to focus in on that first proposition, that the defendant performed the acts which caused the death of the victim in this particular case. Maybe there's something in that second proposition I want the jurors to hone in on when I'm making my argument, not be distracted by all the other text. Again, changing the font color. That phrase, strong probability of death or great bodily harm. I can force the jurors to look at that part of my argument. Again, that's kind of a simple way to do it. Not the best, because you still have a lot of text on that slide, and you really don't want all that text being a distraction to your jurors while you're making your argument. Another thing we'll show you in this episode, episode 13, is how to isolate that proposition, to basically pull just one proposition out of that jury instruction. It floats to the top of the screen and gives you workspace to weave your digital media in to support your argument. And it looks like this. Let's say we want to cover the first proposition. I've isolated it. It floats up to the top of the screen there. And now while I'm arguing, I can use all that space below to use visuals to support what I'm saying. And here's where we marry the law and the evidence with my spoken word. Because remember, with this concept of the visual trial, whenever you can attach a visual to the spoken word, you're increasing memory retention, right? And how can it not be true if the jurors are seeing visual proof of what you're saying? Maybe you have a case that doesn't have a lot of visual evidence. You don't have photographs. You don't have audio files or video files. Maybe you just want to kind of use some buzzwords. How the defendant did or did not, depending on what side of the case you're on, have the motive to commit the crime. How the witnesses gave great or not so great identifications, again, depending on what side of the case you're on. Maybe there's DNA evidence. Maybe you want to incorporate some short quotes from the testimony of the witnesses. As you're talking about, what the defendant might have said during the course of the crime, and there's 3 or 4 just great words, put them up there with quotations. You've got that workspace. But ideally, you have photographs, you have forensic evidence, and you start incorporating that into this PowerPoint here during your argument. In this particular case, we've got fired evidence. There's a shell case there from the crime scene. There's a gun recovered from the crime scene. And you can see I use that little oval or that circle to kind of connect these 3 pictures together, again, to create the visual of how all these 3 photographs come together to prove something. And you can see in the photograph from the crime lab how that shell case recovered from the scene matches a shell case from a test fire at the crime lab. So again, that's weaving the digital media into the argument. You can use video as well. You use this workspace underneath the law that you're talking about to show how the evidence supports what it is you're saying. And then once you've gotten through all the evidence in the argument which supports that you've proven, or if you're on the defense, that the prosecutor or the plaintiff hasn't proven, I throw in this little check mark there. And that's, again, it's a visual. It serves a purpose, especially if you're the party with the burden of proof, because when your jurors go back to deliberate, when they go through those instructions that they're going to have on paper, they're going to remember how you went through those in the PowerPoint, and when you finished that argument and that proposition, you checked it off to show, yes, you did prove that proposition beyond a reasonable doubt if it's a criminal case, by a preponderance of the evidence if it's a civil case. And then you just go on to the next proposition. This particular offense has 2 propositions. Some can have 3, 4, 5, whatever the case may be, but it works the same way. Here's the whole instruction now, and now I want to hone in on the second proposition. I do that again. It floats to the top of the screen, giving me some space below to work with, where I can start incorporating my digital media. I'm not going to show that again, but what I've done here is I've shown an example of where using a visual of my jury instruction is way more effective and persuasive than if I wasn't using it. In Illinois, for this second proposition for murder, there are disjunctive or 3 alternative ways you can satisfy the second proposition for first-degree murder. Now, when I used to give this argument before the days of using PowerPoint in the courtroom, I'd talk about how there's these 3 sub-propositions and they're all separated by the word or, meaning we don't have to prove each and every one of those. And probably 75% of my jurors are looking at me with a glazed look in their eyes because they're just words coming out of my mouth. It doesn't mean a whole lot. But when they visualize that on the screen, and I circle those words or between each of those 3 sub-propositions, and then I say the same thing, it makes sense because they can see what it is I'm talking about. And that's a very effective and persuasive way to use your PowerPoint and your jury instructions and your element charts to make your points in front of the jury. And again, with this one, I would finish up by showing digital media, anything that supports what I'm saying. And again, I would check that box as well, and then throw the entire jury instruction on there and have a check box for the first and second proposition, and wrap up my argument in this particular case that the state or the prosecution has proven each and every element of first-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, so that's episode 13. This is just the trailer. If you like what you've seen, go ahead and check out the full version of this podcast. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. Thank you for visiting. I hope you like what you're seeing, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you. This is Mark with Courtroom Visuals Consulting.